All right. So, welcome to Those Who Give a Damn podcast. I am your host, Dr. Duvalier Malone, and today we're asking a direct question. Do fines stop youth crime? Across Washington, D.C., youth crime has been a conversation to many leaders across the city. Some leaders have proposed to finding parents when their children are violating the curfew here in Washington, and other leaders are against it. Many supporters believe that these penalties will really force parents to take greater responsibilities, and some think they won't, right? And so today I have an expert with us that's going to walk us through this process. We're going to have a candid conversation around this topic, as this was a hot topic, especially around the mayor's election, right? This is something we talked about quite a bit. So, Ms. Jones, welcome to Those Who Give a Damn podcast. And I'm so happy to have you here. And one of the things I like to do with the podcast, I always like people to introduce themselves and tell us the lenses. I always say that the lenses in which we experience the world really craft us to do the work that we do, right? So walk my audience through who you are and how did you get into this work?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you about this topic and, hopefully shed a little more light into some of this thinking. I live in Washington, D.C., and I have lived here for 16 years, and it's where I'm raising my two young children in this city. And so this is a issue that's definitely near and dear to my heart. I come to this work. I have worked in criminal justice reform in the policy space for over 20 years now. I come to this work trained as an attorney, a steep amount of policy background at the US Department of Justice, and then now as the executive director of the Fines and Fees Justice Center. And really, what brought me to the work of law, wanting to be an attorney and really wanting to change the system is really through the lens of my own experience growing up in this country where I had contact with the criminal justice system when I was a teenager. Lots of my friends did. I really understood what happens to those who get second chances and have the resources and have the family support, especially when they're young and they go through these systems versus those who don't. And really cut my teeth in a few different jobs trying to see, like, okay, well, how do you work in the system? How do you defend people? How do you prosecute people? How do you think about this? And landed on, I don't think I can be in the system. I think we actually have to make some changes to how these things work in order to get the types of outcomes that we're looking for and to really have a chance to have safe, thriving communities, which ultimately is what everybody wants for themselves and for their children is to grow up in a safe and thriving community. And that's what I work towards.
Absolutely. I want to jump right in and ask you this. Do you believe that fines actually stop youth crime? And what evidence tell us that?
Yeah, there's no real evidence that fines have an impact on crime and violence this way, or especially in the youth space. There's a little bit of evidence that there could be in general, like a certain amount of fine that serves for a certain amount of deterrence when you're talking about like traffic violations or things that have been studied in terms of, and there's a lot around that about it being quick, certain, fair. How do some of these sanctions work in relation to that? But what we also know is that when people can't afford the
Absolutely.
fines and when you can't afford to pay these things, deterrence is not what happens, right? Safety is not what happens. That's not the relationship between fines and money and lower income circumstances. And so really the effectiveness of this towards getting the outcome, which is like to reduce, violence or to reduce sort of the crime that is happening in youth. That's not how you're going to get there. You are not going to fine and fee your way into that kind of outcome. You're not going to really use law enforcement to enforce your way into that kind of society and into that kind of structure. That's just not how any of this works. And we see that in the adult system. And a lot of that translates into the youth system, but also the youth are particularly different group of people, right, with their own challenges. And so, no, it's not supported by any evidence that this is going to be like an effective model to get what you're looking for at all.
Ask you this. We've had a lot of conversation on this podcast, and particularly ahead of the mayor's election about, youth outreach and how do we prevent youth violence? How do we, what solutions do we have, right? And so a lot of the candidates, brought their solutions, their pros and cons. From the lenses in which you sit, I want to hear from you today about what are some tangible things that we could be doing in solution to prevent fines and this youth crime that we have, not just in Washington, D.C., but around the country.
Yeah, and look, I'm not an expert in dealing with children in this way. You know, I have my own. I have worked around it, but I will say that you are trying to deal with the symptoms, and you are not dealing with the root causes of these symptoms, right? It's that simple. And so when you're looking at enforcement tactics, enforcement strategies, they're always on the other side of something. Something has happened. We have a problem. We're going to enforce and punish our way back into, or maybe never had it in the first place, into something that we are trying to achieve. But nearly, I've always looked at the criminal justice system. It's the catch all. It's the catch all for every other failure that we have allowed to exist in our society. And so when you talk about what could you be doing differently, what is look and examine those root causes. Children who are likely to be engaged and involved in these things, there are economic factors, there are education factors, you're looking at what kind of access to programming and summer jobs and certain types of safe activities do our kids in this city have that are keeping them engaged and productive in meaningful ways and keeping them safe, right, in their communities. You're talking about a lot of this violence comes from people interacting with each other, right, and just living in their neighborhood and moving through spaces. You have to put in solutions where people are able to move safely in their communities without being exposed to danger. And so you have to really think, and that's not policing everybody in this community and acting like everyone is a danger to society, but actually understanding what it takes to do that. I spent 10 years in my career at DOJ, and part of that was working on community policing. What does it actually do? Not just you policing, but what does it actually look like to do community policing at its heart? And fines are not a part of community policing. Having law enforcement cite families and teenagers for breaking curfew, that is not community policing. That's not how we should be using our police. And that is definitely not going to be how you get the outcomes you're looking for.
Absolutely. I want you to, before we go into the adult part of this, I want you to tell the audience about your work that you're doing, right? And why that work is so important before we go into that adult piece that I want to talk about.
Yeah. So the Fines and Fees Justice Center and the movement to address fines and fees really took hold and came out of Ferguson, Missouri. So most people know Ferguson for the shooting of Michael Brown. What's maybe a lesser known fact to most people is that at the same time that the DOJ investigation was happening into the shooting of Michael Brown, there was a separate DOJ investigation into the policing practices of Ferguson. And what was found out through the policing practices was how the city of Ferguson was using its police department, was using its government to issue fines and fees and cite all of the predominantly lower income Black neighborhoods and people and residents in Ferguson and generate revenue through these mechanics for their government. And so,
Wow.
what that meant is that the interactions between law enforcement and the communities they are supposed to serve and protect became one of policing for profit. We're going to stop you, we're going to cite you for every visible thing we can see. We're going to look for all these things. You're playing basketball. I'm going to go over here. We're policing this way. And that form of policing further eroded communities' trust in their law enforcement and the departments that were there. So when you had this shooting of Michael Brown, it was like the fire starter to this keg that had been building when you're policing this way in your communities. And so that really directly tied to what unfolded and then the nation saw in terms of the reaction to the shooting of Michael Brown because they knew their communities were not being served by law enforcement. So our work comes from that knowledge and understanding of what came out of Ferguson and understanding it did not live in Ferguson. It was not just a Ferguson problem. It happens everywhere all across the country. And so we're a national advocacy organization that works with our state and local partners with ground up work and legislative campaigns to end and change these practices.
So profound. And I became so intrigued by this work because I do a lot of work, and particularly with young people, and not just young people, but people that are in underserved communities. And I was working with this particular community in which they were having these targeted DUI stop points. And so they literally were outside of a bar in a small rural community, and that was like a DUI like hotspot. And one of the things that were happening there, a lot of the African Americans were being pulled over versus the whites that were at that bar. And so there was started to be a lot of conversation around it. And I looked up your organization and I was like, oh wow, I need to have you on to talk about that. Because many times there are not only just there are those targeted spots, to your point, that get that revenue, and that targeted spots that get that revenue and prosecute, it's almost like a trifecta, right? Where all of these systems are interconnected together and it really harms people's lives. And so when we think about this, these fines and penalties that also comes with a record, if you don't have the ability, and to your point earlier, to get those things expunged or the ability to be able to advocate for yourself, it creates a problem down the road. And for young people, it's so sad that we live in this country that young people and getting a job in many instances, from coming from the DOJ, you almost have to be perfect, right? To pass those clearances and to get those jobs. So your work is so, so very important. And for legislators and leaders who watch and listen to this podcast, what would be your advice for them to start to decrease some of this, to start to be able to create policies that will help to create some check and balances, not just on the police officers, but on the judicial system, and then also the leaders in the community who are formulating those policies?
Yeah, I mean, it's like any policy solution you're trying to advocate for and think about. You have your quick fixes and you have the deep real work you have to do, right? And so from when I think about the curfew issue in DC and the idea that we're going to go to fines and we're going to enforce more and we're going to escalate those fines, we're going to punish the parents for their kids being out. What it tells me is that you do not have the will or the ability to do the real work that is going to solve the problem. That you want to do the quick fix, the talking point, the thing that lets you go out and look like you're doing something that will have an impact when it's not. It's not going to make us safer. It's not going to be better for our children. And it's surely not going to be better for their families, adding in this additional layer of stress on their families. Because when you think about kids who are likely out past curfew, breaking curfew, being out, what the dynamics at home may be like for these children and what their parents' stresses may be at home. This child could be out past curfew because their parent is working 3 jobs. And so they aren't able, they may be telling them all the right things, but they're not home because they have to work, right? And so what additional stress and layering are you putting into that family, into that community when you're then adding law enforcement and fines and then bringing their parents to court, right? This is just going to get a bigger problem than it's a simple narrative to say, parent your kids better, take more responsibility for your children. But I'm sorry, I still believe in the village and the community. It's all of
Absolutely.
our jobs to take care of our children and to make sure that we are creating communities that are safe for all of our children. And yes, I have a particular interest in mine, but that's not how villages and communities work. So I want real community solutions, and community solutions, those take time. Those take, willpower. Those take conversations to get inside of communities and talk to families and grandparents and aunts and neighbors about where are our children? What is going on with them? Why are they out? Can we do? What resources can we deploy? Who's a safe messenger here? Who are safe community members for them? And really start having those solutions come from the communities that are most impacted by law enforcement overreaching into this space. So, to me, that's the advice is like, if you've signed up to be a policymaker, a legislator, a person who, is taking on that responsibility, then do the whole job, right? Don't just do the quick fix that gives you the talking point and makes you look like you're tough on crime when all of these policies have been debunked. They have been tried. We have done this. It did not make us safer. It did not increase public safety. It did not do anything for the betterment of our children. So try something different and actually get to the root of the problem.
What should you say that leaders should invest in right now to start chipping away at those problems?
Yeah, I think that you have to, first of all, just get away from introducing the idea that the solution is more enforcement, more fines. So, like, just one stop. Stop the conversation. Stop introducing that as an idea. Just stop saying it. It doesn't work. It doesn't help, right? If we could find our way into some better society, we would have got there already. So let's not. And two, let's work with the experts, to which I will not pretend to be, on what kind of programs have had the best results in turning this around. I think we can look right down the street to Baltimore. They're
Absolutely.
doing some great work right now because they have a mayor who is from and of the community leading them in ways that have really addressed their public safety issues, right? And Baltimore has a very long history, and they're right down the road. So I don't think you don't have to come to me, but you should go to the mayor and you should go to
Right.
the community of Baltimore, and you all should talk about what it is that you did that worked. He has shared publicly many times, and how can we learn from them and bring that to DC and share knowledge, because our communities are not fundamentally different and we are not so different that we can't learn from each other and do what Baltimore is doing. So that's what I would suggest. Get on the mayor with the mayor of
Great.
Baltimore and start learning.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let me ask you this. For people who say that, fines is a way of accountability, etc., but we do know that we still have a social economic gap in this country, right? So a $500 fine for upper middle class family is totally different from that family who's living paycheck to paycheck and on public assistance, etc. Explain to the audience why this conversation is so important. Because a lot of time people hear fines and they're like, okay, this is a keep you out of jail situation, pay the fine, and then get it over with and move on with your life. But your work is centered in much more than that. Walk my
Yeah.
audience through that.
Yeah, I mean, you're already on the path, which is, $500 isn't the same to everybody. If don't even $100 is not the same to everybody, right? And I like to, illustrate this point as, like, money is not accountability when you have money in any form, right? And so
That's
if we're
good.
saying that you, as long as I have the money to commit crimes, I should be able to do them. I should be able to disregard the law because I'm going to pay for it. A really common example that this comes up in, which I think is very relatable to most people, is speeding tickets, right? This idea that, okay, if you're saying that the fine is accountability, then, Jeff Bezos, who I believe has a house somewhere in these parts, he can drive as he sees fit as long as he pays the bill for all of his speeding. I don't think that's what we're saying. So it's clearly not a form of accountability, because then he can just send you $500 every month and do whatever he wants, or $5,000.
Absolutely.
And then when you set that same ticket, especially to someone who lives in wards 7 and 8, can take them a day and a half's worth of work to try to pay off that ticket. That is so fundamentally different than getting that ticket in Ward 3, or, one of our more affluent, higher income neighborhoods, where they could pay that ticket with a fraction of a day's worth of work. And I think when you really look at it, is that's not the same accountability. That is not the same punishment. When you tell somebody a day and a half's worth of your work to do this thing, other person did the same thing, a couple hours worth of your work, right? So when we talk about accountability, you actually have to dig a little deeper, that that's not what accountability is. And it's not the same punishment. And that's what we're sort of trying to get across the narrative, is that, yeah, for the policymaker and decision makers, it's very easy to say $100, pay it, move on with your life. But you're also not in a relationship with, for some people, for many people, actually, more than maybe folks would like to acknowledge, getting to that $100 quick feat for them. They're giving up groceries, medicine, essentials in order to pay that kind of fine, and working minimum wage jobs in order to do it. They just do not work together. And so we'll really want to do the work of, severing our narrative that money means you're accountable in any kind of way, because if you don't have it, there's no way to be accountable. And if you have all of it, it doesn't mean anything to use it in order to be accountable.
Absolutely. What would you say one of the biggest misconceptions about fines and fees are?
I think it's that first of all, I think the one big mistake people make is thinking they're the same things, right? And so it's important from a policy standpoint to actually know the difference that fines are the sanction. They are the punishment. They are the sentence, right? So you have to talk about that. Same with what you were saying, like you don't want incarceration. We're not looking for worse things, right? So a fine is a punishment, and we have to have conversations around accountability and punishment and money for sure. But fees are not fines. Fees are revenues or regressive taxes. They're everything you add that generates money for the government. And most of our system is fees, not fines. So folks are even assuming like, oh, it's a fine, it's this. It's actually not. Most of it is fees. So one, separate them, understand them differently, because from a policy standpoint, fees shouldn't exist as far as we're concerned. They should be eliminated. They should be completely not a tool that is in the system at all, because they serve one purpose. That's revenue. Fines, we have to have a much deeper conversation about what happens with fines, because there could be a use, a way, and how you think about it when you are actually considering a person's ability to pay. When you actually think about if you over criminalize, is everything require this, right? That should we be doing that? And you have to also understand that the origins of all these fines and the way we understand them today, it came straight out of racist policies to control, Black bodies very specifically after Reconstruction in the South. And so we adopted those as ways to say everything is a crime. There's a fine, and in historic days when you couldn't pay off that fine, we will incarcerate you, and then we'll release you for labor. Right? Like that's how that system came to be. And so I think we have to challenge our general acceptance of it as it exists and have the right conversations around, because it's always been a part of the American judicial system to have fines. But what we know is when this country used to look different and it was predominantly lower income or white people getting those fines, this is not how we treated it. This is not how we used it. And we did not derail people's lives as a result of it. But we do that now. And what changed? Why do we do that now? We did not do that before.
What do you say to the critics who put that the parents paying fines or as close to the obsessive ticketing across the District of Columbia? Do you put those in the same bucket?
Like the parents paying fines and like the way
The,
we ticket everything in
yeah,
the
the way we
city.
ticket everything in DC. As and,
I
and
mean,
to a
they
point they say it's starting to be like a revenue grabber,
right.
right?
I don't put the reason that people are doing those things the same. I think that our obsession with ticketing and revenue in the city and all the speed cameras and the traffic cameras and the like whole that is all about revenue. It is a whole different conversation. And we should be making our streets safer for drivers and pedestrians, but that's not how you're going to do it. And there's a lot of research around that. And then I think this issue with parents and fines, I don't know that it is intention is to generate revenue as much as I think it is to try to seem like you are tough on crime. And I think that you're, hey, we're gonna hold these people accountable, and we're gonna make you, punish for your children, right? And I think that narrative resonates with people. I also think like I said, it's so simple. But I will tell you, as a child who had really great parents who tried to raise me with all the great values that eventually did come in and they stuck and they empowered me. I did a lot of stupid stuff as a child, a lot, including things that led to me getting arrested. And I don't think if you had fined my parents, it would have changed anything about the level of trying and work they were putting in to guide me on the right path.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What they needed was a different kind of support to support me into making better decisions, because the things they were doing were clearly, resonating with me at the time. But it wouldn't have done anything except put more stress on them, made them likely more angry with me than they were already were, and caused even more problems in our household. So they wanted to be great parents. They wanted to have a child who did the right things. So that's why I'm like, the narratives that you want to create are not, they're simple, and people's lives are complicated. And so you're going to have to look for a suite of solutions. Some are going to be the support parents need, right? To parent in the way that can make connections. Some of this is going to be more resources, and some of this is going to be community based in terms of when the parents can't because they're working 3 jobs? Where do the children go? What can they be doing? How can we step in? Because we used to have that, and we don't have.
Absolutely, absolutely. You really segue into my next question. And one of the things I want to do as we kind of close out, as I told you, I've spent a lot of time, talking to politicians. And so now I want to talk to people like you, right, who's actually doing some of this work. And not that you're in the business of giving politicians advice, right? But we do have a Democratic nominee, Janice Lewis George, who is presumptive to be the next mayor of the District of Columbia. And we have a lot of new incoming members on the council, right? And new leadership that's coming into leadership here in Washington. If you were in the business of giving them advice, you are also a mother, right? You have lived experiences. You understand how policy is made just from the array of experience you have. What would you say to them as they are going to be really faced with tackling youth crime in the next couple years, if not the duration of their tenure in those positions?
Yeah, I usually am not in the business of giving folks advice, but I will say as a resident of this city, I deeply care about this issue, right? I think we all want to see something better for our youth, right? I have a preteen boy in this city. I constantly worry about what his life is going to be like raising a black and brown boy in the city with this kind of intensity around policing our children, right? And whether he's going to have the freedom to be a child and grow up here based on how he looks and who he is. And so I would tell these new folks coming in, whoever they are, that you have the opportunity to invest in long-term decisions that are going to pay dividends, but they will not be quick fixes. They may not even bear fruit in your administration.
Wow,
And
that's
you need
powerful.
to have the will to do it regardless of whether you get the credit or if it comes to fruition in your administration, because that is how we are going to build towards a city that serves everybody and is for everybody. And there are probably things you can do immediately that will benefit everyone's public safety concerns, because I also have them. I'm not acting like we don't share in concerns, but I do not share in these solutions as the answers and rely on, I'm really not kidding when I'm like, Mayor Scott has figured out some things,
Absolutely.
y'all. Like, he
Absolutely.
has figured out some things and he is willing to share. You should talk to him and others like him who are putting into get to policies that have absolutely made their cities safer, better, community based, and they know what they're doing, and pull them into the conversation. Do not act like you have to do it alone, but you do have to have the wherewithal to know the real solutions. You gotta be put your values first to get there.
Absolutely. Tell my audience how to get involved and what support you all need right now as an organization.
Yeah, well, we work all around the country. There are nearly more than half the states with our state and local partners and run campaigns with our state and local partners. So, one, you can come to our website, which if you just put in Google, Find Some Peace Justice Center, you will find us. You'll find everything about us, but also connect with your state and local partners who are looking at the criminalization of poverty and solutions in economic spaces that are overlapping with the criminal justice system, and we're probably working with them. And you find your state and local groups, and that is where the power lies. That is how we get things done. And then that's the only way. It's the only way we're going to move forward. And there's some really great organizations in DC. I'm going to give DC Justice Lab. They are out here doing really, really great work in this city in particular. So if you're local here, I encourage you to support them and to tap into them, because they will bring you forward in this city.
Absolutely. And, I'm going to reach back out to your team so that we can connect and talk to some people on the ground in
Yeah.
some other states across this country. Thank you so much for joining me here today. But I can't let you go without asking the one question we've been asking this season on the podcast, right?
Okay.
Why do you give a damn?
How do you not give a damn? How do you not? In my DNA. Yeah.
I love that. I want to tap into one complete the sentence here. Your hope for your son and future generations to come.
They will know real freedom and real joy.
Thank you so much again, Ms. Jones, for joining me here today. on those who give a damn. When I tell you your light is shining so bright, and it really came through in today's interview, and I hope that someone is inspired, informed to continue to do this work. And thank you for giving a damn about those issues that really sometimes go not noticed in a way that they should in our society. So thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining me. Awesome.